Welcome to the lABLEd podcast, a show about disability, illness and difference.
And history.
I'm Lucy.
And I'm Alice.
I'm Daisy.
So much more than what you see. We all live our lives differently. Kaleidoscope identity. And this is who I'm meant to be. I'm just labelled me. I'm just labelled me.
Don't forget, in this episode, I might swear, Lucy might cry, and you can check out details of the trigger warnings on our website.
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of the lABLEd podcast. We are continuing our history lesson episodes this week. Usually me and Alice take it in turns to tell each other about a famous historical person who had a disability. But we've got Daisy involved now. So Daisy is also involved with this. She has prepared our first history lesson where we don't know anything about it. So, Daisy.
Yes, so you specifically requested someone who you had not heard of.
Yeah, we did.
So, this is someone that I don't think you will be aware of, but around here where I live in Bristol, some more people may well be aware.
Right.
Okay.
So, this is Lady Violet Aspley,
Okay.
Right.
who is Bristol's first female MP and a wheelchair user.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes.
I will warn you now,
Right.
she does suck a bit.
Yeah.
Before you get too excited.
I was excited that she was a wheelchair user, and then you tell me she sucks. Brilliant. Okay.
Well,
Can I just say a disclaimer? We're not all like that, ladies and gentlemen.
It makes quite a nice change from the trope you see in like film and TV of like, oh, all disabled people are so sweet and nice and innocent. You need a bastard every now and then.
Yeah. Was she was she an out and out bitch, or was she a bitch?
Was she just a
inadvertently?
little bit of a bitch? Just a minor B.
Yeah, bitch with a small b.
yeah. The problem is, I guess, those terms I would generally take to mean, her sucking in terms of her personality.
Right.
Okay.
Where it wasn't so much that, it was more her views.
Right. So politically,
Yeah.
she was
right. Okay.
bit. Was she's not like secretly a black shirt or something, is she? Cool. Okay. All right. Cool. Let's go then.
Check yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen. This could be a bumpy ride.
She is really, really interesting though.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I mean, nice people generally aren't very interesting. Nice people are usually very boring, and so.
Thanks, Alice.
Sorry, Luce.
she's really interesting, and it's certainly incredibly, noteworthy because she was the first disabled MP in Britain and one of the first disabled MP in Bristol, and one of the first disabled MPs in general, and I think probably the first disabled female MP.
Okay.
Because at the time that she was elected, there were 15 female MPs in the whole country, so there weren't many.
No. What time period are we talking?
So she was born in 1895
Okay.
and died in the late 60s. So we're counting sort of the two world wars as her kind of time period.
Mm-hmm.
She was born into like landed gentry type family, really posh, aristocratic, that sort of thing.
Like most MPs even now.
Yeah. pretty much. She was from like a military backgrounded family, as was also often the way at that time. She served during the First World War as a nurse, ambulance driver, an early interest in politics, it was mainly when she married her husband. So her husband was the Lord Apsley, which is how she became Lady Apsley.
Right. Okay.
He was a soldier and a politician, and she was sort of, very supportive of his political career. And so it was actually his parliamentary seat that she took over.
Okay.
So this was, of course, the time when, where you were the MP of didn't necessarily make any difference to sort of where you were from. So
Right.
he was originally an MP in Liverpool.
Oh, okay.
And then
okay.
came to Bristol and was the MP here for a bit.
Is that what happened then? So, like, if you were elected, say, in like Liverpool, and then you moved to Bristol, you still were an you don't just give up your seat because you've relocated.
Yeah, no. Like he lost his seat to someone else, and so they
so
they put him up for election elsewhere.
And then he tried again in Bristol and got in.
Yeah. Basically,
Right. Yeah.
He was, Eton and Oxford, and she was born in. No, I can't even remember where she was born. she was born in London.
Right.
So they would.
I always think, like, personally, I feel like my local MP should have a local connection to the area that they're representing.
Yeah.
It's not just you just turn up anywhere and be like, oh, I'm going to be MP here because I know what's best for these people. That's just not. That's not. I feel like that's not how politics should work. I don't know if that's still how politics works. I don't.
Yeah, it can be. Usually, I think they have to have an address in the constituency.
Mm.
But it can just be like a little rented studio flat somewhere.
Yeah. That you
PO
don't
box.
that you don't actually live in.
Yeah, but that's beside the point.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Was Violet always disabled, or did she become disabled? Or
no, she became disabled.
Right. Okay.
So, being from the background of the aristocracy and the gentry and all of that, and becoming a lady and her husband being a lord, she was injured in a hunting accident.
Right. Okay.
Did they mistake her for a fox?
It's hard to tell because they won't tell us anything else about the accident.
So you just know she had an accident?
It's just a hunting accident.
So she could have fallen off the horse, or
she could have been attacked by one of the geese she was chasing.
Yeah, or being shot herself or whatever.
Yeah, in the foot or something.
It can't help my animal rights liberal, slightly vegan self. It's like, fuck it, serves you right.
Well, this is one of the things she is certainly in her views, like by the standards of today, they seem quite sort of contradictory. So she had a lot of like personal political views that now you would consider sort of like part of movements that are very progressive.
Okay.
And then others which are just completely the other way.
Right.
And so
I look forward to getting into this.
So I people have sort of struggled to quite figure her out, which is one of the reasons there isn't necessarily a lot about her. So most of what I have comes from one professor who has done all of this research and work on her. When they've done like a few years back when they were doing all of the celebrations and things for 100 years of women's suffrage, things like that, and they did displays and exhibitions about women in Parliament, and there was just kind of barely any mention of her.
Oh, you see that makes me a bit sad. No matter, I mean, even if she was a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? That's still quite sad, I think.
Yeah, and I know there are a lot of people that you have to feature, but for her being so early and kind of visibly and openly disabled.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the reason that there wasn't a lot about her because of her disability, or do you think it's just the lack of information? Because I mean, it's fairly recent times. I sort of assume the information's probably out there. She's, going to have recent descendants and stuff still around.
Yeah, so a lot of this has come from personal papers, but some of her descendants actually destroyed some of her personal papers.
Okay. It's going to be juicy when they destroy
the family's burning the evidence.
and to be like, when she has been written about, she has been somewhat dismissed as a kind of political lightweight who just took over her husband's seat for a few years and wasn't necessarily a kind of political figure in her own right.
Mm-hmm.
That she was, just kind of doing it because they needed someone to do it, to
like
take over the seat.
Like a hand-me-down job, like, oh, well, nobody else. Yeah, okay, I get it.
Yes, so because he died.
Mm-hmm.
And then she took over the seat after he died.
Right. And didn't go on to, be re-elected or anything later. It was...
So he died. She did win.
Okay.
The election after that. Then... So, but she was only MP for one term.
Right. I feel like we're jumping all over in this timeline. Shall we perhaps shut up and let you talk?
No, so jumping about all over the timeline really suits me because all of my notes are everywhere.
Okay.
Daisy's so well prepared, everybody.
Well, okay, so am I unprepared, or have I made an active decision to do it this way so that it seems more like a conversation?
We
will never know. We will never know for true. Violet became disabled in 1930. So that was sort of, in between the two world wars. It's this sort of interwar period and the time when you're kind of leading up to the Second World War that the two of them as a couple, because realistically they are kind of they are a political couple,
right?
Essentially, she was very sure of her views of sort of women have a very specific place in the country, and that is primarily as wives and mothers, but she did a lot of other political work, with her husband as they were going along. So before her accident, one of the things that they did is that they actually went undercover as to report back for the government. So this was after her husband was working in Parliament, but before the accident still. So they went to Australia, where at the time, English and British people who were going to Australia to find work were being put in, they were being temporarily put in sort of resettlement camps, as you would call it. Sort of like, the idea was that you would go to Australia, stay in the camp for a bit while you found whereabouts you were going to.
Right, a bit like quarantine now.
sort of, yeah, except not for, a pandemic disease, just for, being British.
Okay. Right, okay.
And they went undercover in one of these camps and kind of, let the government know what the conditions were actually like, which is that they weren't very pleasant at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you say the word camp and it immediately, it's not a very good look, is it really?
Yeah.
No, I mean, you think, resettlement camps, we have similar things in for refugees, and they're not nice places to be.
Yeah. So how long was she in the camp for then with her husband?
So it wasn't all that long, as far as we can tell, but they wrote, she actually wrote a book about it when they got back, about their memoirs of being there. They were, sort of really sympathetic and spoke really, kind of movingly of all of these, sort of British people in these camps, because it was sort of still part of our empire at this point.
Yeah.
It was technically the government's responsibility, and but they just kind of, taken a bit of a hands-off approach.
Out of sight, out of mind, almost.
Yeah. But kind of, throughout all of this, they're kind of, very sympathetic to, the plight of the, I keep saying British, but realistically they refer to as English.
Yeah, I suppose we're at that point in Australian history where you have the indigenous people who have been there for thousands of years, and then you have the people who colonized it and their descendants, who I suppose you would now be referred to as Australians, who, they're recent British immigrants, basically, and then the people actually there arriving from Britain. Yeah,
they weren't overly sympathetic in their views and writings to the indigenous population of Australia.
That surprised me. That rich white people were unsympathetic of the horrible lives that they had inflicted on vast swathes of indigenous people who were quite happy minding their own fucking business for 1,000 years.
Yeah, basically. But yes, they had to come back and they reported to that, and they wrote their memoirs, and they became sort of quite sort of well known for that. It's kind of like, almost like activisty type things. So originally, her husband, he was supposed to go on his own, and she insisted on going with him.
Of course she did. Free holiday.
Free holiday to a nice resettlement camp.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think it was like a spa.
She was very political and interested, and she was always interested, and I think she also thought that it would make it more convincing.
Okay.
Yeah.
As well.
Give her a bit of clout to say, well, I actually did this. I didn't just talk about it.
Well, yeah. Give her a bit of clout, but also, we're a newly married couple, and we're moving to Australia to make
she is trying to come across as the supportive wife who, I will go and support my husband because we're newly married. Did she have any political ambitions at this point?
She was very active in the sort of the conservative women's associations.
Right, okay.
But that was primarily, particularly at that time, the Conservative Women's Association didn't really do anything political. They didn't do much campaigning or things like that. It was kind of, they were primarily, focused on getting more members to the Conservative Party so that they would get more votes. So while she was interested, and being that her husband was an MP, she was more active than a lot of people were, rather.
I wasn't going to say anything. My father's voice in the back of my head very disapprovingly went, other people was.
But yeah, so she was always doing those bits, and when we get to sort of during the Second World War as well, her husband was off serving, and so she was doing during that time a lot of the sort of normal MP things anyway. But still, it took the lead up to the Second World War. So being as they were, from the sort of upper class right wing ruling elite, they saw the kind of communism and that out of the Soviet Union as much more of a threat than fascism.
Right, okay.
Which is, I know it's baffling to us. But...
I mean, what the communist Soviets did to the people of Russia was terrible, but I don't necessarily think that was because they were communist. I think that was because they were power-drunk dictators. I think
But yeah, that was a really common view, though, particularly among the upper classes, is that, you know, realistically, you know, if fascism comes in, they're going to be fine.
Well, and who was there was a royal, wasn't there?
Yes.
Those royal sisters who didn't one of them run off to marry Goebbels or something like that? I don't think it was Goebbels.
Okay, so that was Prince Philip's sisters, who both married sort of.
One of them married Black Shirt, I think, and one of them married the Nazi.
They both married members of the Nazi Party, and I mean Prince Philip had basically cut them out of his life quite early on. Yeah. Yes, quite quickly. And there is the story as well of King Edward after he abdicated.
Yes.
Touring Nazi Germany.
Yes.
See, it's one of these complicated things, because obviously, you know, if you're going to hang around with Nazis and then people suggest that you might be a Nazi, like, you don't really have any line of defense on that. And fair enough.
Yeah.
You know, like, sorry, those are two things that are incompatible. You cannot hang out with a Nazi and then also have people not say, are you sure you're not a Nazi, though?
And I can't imagine having a cup of coffee and a chat and just hang out with a mate of mine who also holds extreme fascist views and not coming up in conversation once or twice.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
you can't turn around and go, what? Brian's a Nazi. I didn't realise. Did he? Is he?
Oh, he's never mentioned it. Oh, you know, Brian couldn't come to that party last weekend. Oh, it's because he's a Nazi. Oh, really? Oh, I didn't know about Brian.
It's tricky for us looking back, because obviously, yeah, when we look back, having sort of, you know, not been there at the time, you kind of forget the amount of time that there was in between, sort of, you know, the Nazis turning up and the Nazis winning an election and the beginning of the Second World War.
And it was a bit like a drip feed, wasn't it? Of everything was it's not so bad, and then like very, very slowly, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, how did we end up here?
And actually, the anti-Semitism and the racism, you know, was very. It was everywhere. It was quite. That wasn't necessarily shocking opinions to have.
Yeah.
It was the far end of the spectrum about it was the fact that, you know, these people were so abhorrent to the Nazis that they should be exterminated, whereas most people just thought that, you know, they were second-class citizens and didn't deserve to have the same rights. It's neither of them's acceptable, but there is a step between the two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Around this time, so, you know, you're talking about the sort of mid to late 30s, this idea that sort of war might be coming along. And when we look back at it now, so you've probably heard of the term appeasement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This thing that was supposed to, you know, stop another world war, which we now look back on as kind of, well, that was never going to work, obviously. You know, you're all terrible for even suggesting it. And
you can understand it, though, when you look at basically a generation of young men died.
Yeah, exactly. This was a really, you know, I'm not going to say that, you know, it's unfair for us to look back and say that that was a terrible idea. However, you know, you do have to, you know, recognise that it was still really recent. The end of the First World War was still so recent.
Yeah, it was an attempt at diplomacy before war, which I think that at least should be recognised as, you know.
Yeah, Violet and her husband were big proponents of appeasement,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, like to a point that was, you know, actually quite disturbing, in that they were still organising pro-appeasement talks in Bristol here in April 1939, which was after Crystal Night,
Right.
which you may remember was that particular time when the Nazis went after Jews in Germany. So that was it. That was in November 1938.
Right.
This was also after Germany invaded Czechoslovakia. So this was after the start of the war.
So this is very much a case of shutting the barn door after the horses. The horse is not just bolted. The horse is like 6 farms over, setting up shop with a new rider.
So this is what I was thinking. And then I sort of had a quick look at the dates and things. Was sort of working out how that... So while this was after the invasion of Czechoslovakia, this was, I'm pretty sure, just before... Like, this was before we entered the war.
Mm.
Right, okay. Yeah.
So, essentially, they were advocating for a scenario where the war is already happening. You know, that's done, but just we don't get involved.
Yeah.
Right, okay. So we like sit on the sidelines and go, it's nothing to do with us.
And just, and have some kind of, agreement.
Yeah.
Yes.
The Nazis essentially, but not necessarily that we're going to go and help them out, but just that we won't go for each other.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
And you can see the sort
You can
of the
see
logic behind it, because
you can see
they
the
are
thought process. Can't you?
and they're over there. They're not on our doorstep. They've got they've got all of France and the Channel before they could get to us. It's a kind of, well, let's not have a war if it's not going to do us any harm, particularly if they don't think, if fascism does spread across Europe, they don't think that it's going to be an issue. Bombs are an issue for everybody. Fascism might not be an issue for them.
But yeah, it's a very tempting idea to cut all of that out, to have, to try and avoid that war when it is still so recent. When, a lot of these, communities that were destroyed during the First World War still haven't been, built back up again.
I mean, the context is it's 21 years. So it's basically, it was your parents' war.
Yeah.
And if we're all still banging on about the Second World War, which was our grandparents' war, of course, these people are still, that's really fresh. There are going to be people who lost parents and siblings, who were still young and active and very aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
It's very much still in living memory, isn't it?
It is. And, you see that if you, look into stories of people who died during the Second World War, and so many of them are people who survived the First World War.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of devastating, the idea that there are those people who had to do it twice.
Yeah.
And so, not only was this idea of, appeasement very tempting, it was very widespread.
Right.
And it was widespread across the upper echelons of society who felt like they didn't have an awful lot to lose from fascism, but also it was at one point an almost pact between Britain and Nazi Germany seemed to be something that was actually being investigated.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's not something they tell you on the History Channel.
Yeah, so here's the thing. Part of it is kind of like, well, it's almost good sense to kind of look into all of your options. And lots of upper class British people, important in society and, trained, pilots or fighters or generals, things like that. They were being sort of courted by the Nazis to sort of like, would you like to come over to our side? And, teach them how to do all of this stuff. So they both visited a Nazi-run labour camp in Germany.
Ooh. I don't know what that noise was, but it was a what?
Yeah, and
we didn't know what labour camps and death camps. We did that. There was a difference. The POW camps were different. We didn't know quite what was happening,
and they didn't know. They didn't know, did they? What we know now.
No, we didn't.
Yeah,
we didn't
so-
know most of that until after the war was over.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Yeah, so this is where you start getting into, well, I say you start getting into, it's not where you start getting into them very clearly having some kind of, racist, anti-Semitic views.
Okay.
Half this stuff comes from this particular researcher that I was telling you about, who has found out all of this sort of, information about Lady Apsley, found a political autobiography that she wrote just after the war. A lot of these parts about the lead up to the Second World War and about appeasement were ripped out and destroyed. So the reason that
and you can only assume
this,
that's because that's inflammatory. And
yes.
Yeah.
So this researcher, Dr. Madge Dresser, she was looking for evidence of the Apsley's fascist sympathies. And basically found that the one bit that she wanted to read was not there anymore.
Ah.
So
these who ripped that out, or was that a family? Or
yeah, so supposedly this was the Apsley's granddaughter or daughter-in-law.
daughter-in-law,
daughter-in-law?
Right? Okay. Yeah.
Like ripped those bits out and destroyed it.
Okay.
But there were other papers, relating to her scattered all over the place, and so Dr. Dresser has basically managed to build up all of those missing pages again, but just sort of not in her own voice.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they visited Nazi Germany, and she spoke admiringly of what she called, and I quote, Nordic blonde gods who were residing in the camp, and who apparently had a better work ethic than the working class British counterparts.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting, to think that this is somebody who spent time in a resettlement camp in Australia, and it basically is evidence of, for her, the environment, the circumstances, the living conditions that people can be subjected to is entirely related to their social standing, their race, their background.
Yeah, basically. There was,
This is a really fun episode, Daisy, thanks.
Well, I did warn you that she sucked.
Can we do Nelson again?
She's really interesting, but it's kind of, some of it you can put down to just that sort of cluelessness that comes from, being in that part of society. It's kind of like, yeah, it'll be fine. Sure, there'll be some, fascist and really racist and anti-Semitic and that, but it's like that that bit of Shrek with Lord Farquaad. Some of you may die, but that is a risk I am willing to take.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed when that meme was going around and everybody was comparing it to Boris at the beginning of the pandemic. It's just like, yes.
Oh yeah, that was.
I just love Shrek, to be honest.
Yeah.
I love that me and Daisy are getting all political, and Lucy's like, Kidsville!
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's okay. So while at this point, they were big on the idea of appeasement and trying to, prevent this war, and they were kind of essentially following, the kind of tacit approval that was being shown for Nazi regime. So this is still sort of, in the lead up to the Second World War.
Okay.
So, this isn't on our entrance to the war, and when the bombs started falling and it became, obvious, they became sort of stalwarts of the resistance to the Nazis.
Yeah.
And she led the women's section of the British Legion, and her husband went away to fight, and she was doing basically all of his MP's work.
It became very much a Nordic gods. Oh no, I never said that. No, that wasn't me. Oh no, I hate the Nazis.
I don't even like blonde men.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's hard to say how much of the original tolerance of Nazism and fascism was because they didn't care, and how much of it was just that they had decided not to see it.
Right, okay.
Which I think is a very upper class skill, isn't it?
It is, and it is what's sort of been accused of with the King Edward, who then abdicated and went on tours of Nazi Germany and all of that. Yeah, of course it doesn't help that Hitler and the higher ups in the Nazi Party were very specifically trying to win over the upper class British
yes
elites who could
sway,
who could either sway or influence people, not necessarily to not have a war to go over to their side, but to be kind of
to promote their cause, almost
to promote their cause, and to just sort of essentially not join in.
Right, okay.
And so there is, the chances are is that they were being shown, they were very specifically being shown what they wanted them to see.
Yeah.
And obviously that was much more racist and fascist and anti-Semitic than we now would be, well, that we would approve of or tolerate or whatever, when there are those upper class people who are naturally much more scared of Stalinism than of fascism. That's kind of a level that they're willing to tolerate, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say how much of their obvious objection to Nazism during the Second World War was down to, hang on a minute, they've been doing all these terrible things that I don't like, and how much of it is that they were bombing all of their stuff.
Yeah. Yes, okay. Yeah. How dare you inconvenience me?
Yes. Yeah. The rich do like their stuff.
Yeah.
They like their stuff, and they like their position, being in charge of things.
Yeah. So she was sort of a Nazi, but not really. But
she was a Nazi in denial.
But this was all before she had her accident. No, she had her accident in 1930?
She had her accident in 1930, so this is after that. She was really active both privately and publicly, after her accident. So she was unable to walk, and she was in a lot of pain, and she was a wheelchair user, but she never seems to have made any attempt to hide that she was now a wheelchair user.
Right.
Good for her.
Yeah, but it is even that late, it is still somewhat unusual.
Absolutely.
For her not to hide her disability was not unusual.
Yeah, not necessarily that. So for example, FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's it's a little bit earlier, but that was that kind of, it was relatively common, not for people to specifically be hiding it, but just to not mention it, and kind of like oh well, I'm going to get there before and sit in a different chair, so that you can see me coming in the wheelchair. Yes. And it was kind of like there wasn't any of that sort of but FDR, are you disabled? No, absolutely not. But
no.
but particularly for someone who's after the First World War, you got more people who were veterans from the First World War who there was no hiding of what happened, because it was
thousands of men had trench foot and came home only needing one shoe.
Exactly. Yeah, there was so much of it about, but also it was it was kind of a symbol of sacrifice and, look at the best of British, all of that.
So do you think she was proud of the fact that she was a wheelchair user?
I think proud is a bit too strong a word.
Okay.
But she certainly didn't seem to, think of herself any worse because of it.
Right.
And it sounds like she didn't think that society should think worse of her because of it.
Absolutely.
So...
Absolutely, yeah.
Cool.
So, yeah, her maiden speech in the House of Commons when she was elected was from her wheelchair and an appeal for better treatment of disabled people.
Cool.
Okay. That's a saving grace.
Yeah.
Isn't it, really?
Yeah. Yeah, so during the Second World War, her husband was fighting abroad, and she was taking care of his sort of, constituency work, as you would call it now. So he was in Malta, in the Air Force, and when he was on a they call it a passenger plane, but there was, it was like an RAF passenger plane, so there was like 7 people on it.
Yeah.
It took off from Malta and crashed very soon afterwards.
Okay. Oh, okay.
So he.
How pissed off would you be if you were like in the army in the war and you died, but you didn't sort of die in battle? You died because somebody cocked up, like flying your plane. I feel like I want a hero's death.
Yeah, I mean, I feel the historical record hasn't ascribed blame.
The way you said it doesn't sound like they were shot out the sky. It sounds like the pilot wasn't paying attention and it was like, oh shit, there's a mountain there.
Yeah, so I mean, he's considered a war death. So this is the thing. I'm not sure. He could well have been shot out of the sky. Right.
Was it the plane crash that killed him then?
Yes, right. It was. Crashed on impact.
Okay.
But yes, so he died in Malta, and she was now, Conservative MP's widow.
Mm.
And so when they had the election for, after their MP had died, a by-election essentially,
right?
She won his seat. She not only won his seat, but she increased his majority.
Okay.
That's cool.
Partly, I think, some people have just kind of been like, oh, well, she was the wife of the old MP. Of course she won. But I think, quite more than that, she had already been doing the job for, a couple of years.
I think, like, when you first started talking about it, it sounded like she just walked into it. But the fact that she would have actually had to be elected,
yeah,
I think that actually says quite a lot more.
And also, he went to war, so she was doing his job whilst he was at war anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. So, she was elected then, and this researcher has written that she didn't have star qualities. So she isn't necessarily,
a likeable
remembered.
person.
Well, she isn't kind of, remembered as a lot of those other, like Mary Astor and all of that.
A popularity game, isn't it? As much as it shouldn't be, but so you can understand there are a certain type of person who's remembered as being that charismatic politician.
Yeah, absolutely. And she wasn't sort of necessarily that, and a lot of people have kind of dismissed her as kind of not really doing all that much. But she spoke in all kinds of different debates, and she campaigned on a lot of different topics. She lobbied a lot for disabled veterans, and for the rights of women who had been working in the armed forces during the war effort to be able to keep their jobs after the war, that they didn't have to just sort of immediately leave because the war was over.
Absolutely.
She had sort of quite a traditional view of womanhood, in that they were wives and mothers, but also that very insistent that they were vital. And so, this is where you get this thing that I mentioned earlier, which is that sort of crossover of things that we would consider to be sort of, quite progressive and things that really are not. So it's kind of, this idea that, women are completely, vital to the way the country is run, and also that, fathers should have been doing more in order to raise their children and to, help out and all of that. And she was also like very, she was really concerned about protecting green spaces.
That's cool.
That like protecting natural green spaces and what we would now consider sustainable agricultural policies.
Okay, yeah.
And things like composting and recycling waste and
that is
things like that.
That almost, if you took those beliefs and manifestos and whatnot into this day and age, you'd think she was like forgetting the fascism and the Nazism and all that kind of stuff. But if you take the progressive stuff, that could be like this day and age politician, really, couldn't it?
It's the thing. It's one of these really fascinating things
about
her, because it's kind of yes, a lot of that sort of I guess what you would now call environmentalism type things comes from her background of being very posh and having a lot of grounds and hunting and all of that, but it is still very progressive. In those terms. It's
so like after the war, was it kind of like brushed under the carpet that she was a bit of a Nazi sympathiser, and did she kind of like reinvent herself like Tom Jones does every 15 years?
Yeah, so this is the thing, she didn't actually last in Parliament for all that long.
No.
So she lost her re-election in 1945.
Okay.
Which was just after the war ended, which was when there was the landslide Labour victory that ended up, bringing in things like, the NHS and the welfare state, which, by the way, she was very opposed to. But she lost her seat then. And so she wasn't, she was a wartime MP.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. So what happened to her when she lost her seat then? Did she just...
So she tried running for Parliament again elsewhere in sort of late 40s, but was unsuccessful. But basically, in the few years after she lost her seat, she was still an active member of the Conservative Women's Association, and she campaigned against a lot of the Labour policies. But she essentially formally retired from politics in the 50s. And, she just sort of disappeared into the background.
So nothing much is known about her after a political career. She just kind of retreated.
Yeah, not a huge amount. It's kind of because if you go and look at her Wikipedia page, it's one page. Like, I was trying to find, because I printed it out somewhere around here, but it's less than one sheet of A4.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's wild.
I have always thought that if you are an MP and you've been an MP for say 20, 30 years, and then all of a sudden you go to like the local leisure centre on election night, and then I'm talking about modern day now, not back in like 1940s time. You go to a leisure centre on an election night, and it's like, oh, I've lost my seat, and then overnight, that's it.
Yeah,
you lose your job, don't you?
Yeah.
You lose your purpose.
I can remember not the most recent local election. We're probably talking. I think it was the year that we ended up with the coalition government, because that's how old I am. I was walking back from voting with my mum, and there was this little lad. We'd been to his primary school to vote, and there was this little lad there walking back with his dad, and his dad was asking his dad about voting, and said something like, "Oh, who did you vote for, Daddy?" And he said, "Oh, I voted for the Labour candidate." And he said, "And do you think he's going to win?" And his dad said, "Actually, I don't think he is." And the little boy went, "Oh, but it's all right, Daddy, because it's not the winning, it's the taking part, isn't it?"
Yeah.
Just like, no, I don't think it works like that in politics.
No. I mean, that must have been devastating, because she'd obviously, like, her husband's died, she got his seat, then won an election, and all of a sudden, like, lost her seat. What do you do then?
Yeah.
You have to have some sort of fight in your belly to keep going. Okay, I'll change direction and do something different.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I guess this is the thing, because she was from such a rich background, she didn't really.
No,
she didn't have to do anything different. She was fine, but she did.
Completely annihilated my point there, Daisy. Thank you.
she just went and sat on her family pile, didn't she? And just got old and died.
I wonder if she spent her time learning how to pull a wheelie. Yeah.
So, yeah, she did have, she did some other things in the Conservative Party, and she was made a CBE
Okay.
in 1952.
Mhm.
But other than that, she's stayed doing some work for the British Legion that she'd been doing during the war as well.
I mean, it sounds like she could have done with another war, really. That would have suited her.
Something to get really riled up about, yeah.
Yeah, something to do, yeah.
It's this episode has made me think very much of the BBC podcast with Russell Kane, Evil Genius.
Yes.
And I feel
One of
like
my favourites.
we need to, put her on the scales here of her views of her being a Nazi sympathiser. Can you forgive those kind of beliefs when her other beliefs were quite progressive?
This is the thing, and I've been thinking about this while we've been recording this episode. A little bit of me thinks, like, was it the sort of period of time she was living in, and the fact that there was quite a lot of it about, and it's quite easy to get swept along with it, and then go, "Oh, okay, we've ended up here. This is not where I wanted to be. Can we make a U-turn? Can I turn around somewhere and change my mind?" But then, is that giving her too much credit for following blindly like a sheep? I don't know, really. I don't know.
I always think that, there is always an element of saying people are a product of their time. People say a lot of it about, slavery in America. People are always talking about, George Washington and the fact that he had slaves. But my counter argument to that is always, yes, but even then there were people who were against it. Even you can't say it was the ignorance of the time when there were people even then going, this isn't right. And I think that was the same with fascism. Even then there were people going, what, just because that person's of the Jewish faith, just because that person is a person of color, just because that's a disabled person, then they're not human and should be exterminated.
Yeah.
It's that there are even then, I think saying that it's an ignorance of the time period, I think it's more an ignorance of the person choosing not to
sticking her fingers in her ears and going la 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 la, I can't hear you, la 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 la.
Exactly. And one of the things that, like, when we were talking about all the stuff she did later, the being environmentally, pro green and pro women and stuff like that, there is a part of me that feels like it was a bit self-serving. And the Nazi sympathising thing was because it suited her. And then when it stopped suiting her, that was when she changed her tune.
Daisy, do you think that the kind of things she was pro for after the war. So not specifically the green spaces and stuff like that, but the disability, rights and all that kind of thing. Do you think that was born out of some sort of weird guilt almost? Like, oh my God, I can't, like, the Nazis did this, I can't quite believe it. I'll try and sort of reconcile in my own head what I was, sympathizing for. Or do you just think, I mean, that's what I always wonder. People...
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, people like that going,
What
this is really
what do you
bad.
think drove her politically?
Yeah.
So I suspect that those pages that we don't have from her memoir tell us a lot.
Yeah.
I suspect that the reason why those are gone are because they imply not just sympathy, but a sort of,
complete allegiance,
active support.
Yeah.
I do, however, also think that people in general, while it's, like you, I don't necessarily agree with that whole, they didn't know at the time. But what I do think is that people do tend to take the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And if that means that if they do nothing will change for them,
yeah,
then they are willing to do that. And it is only when things start changing for them that they have to do something about it.
Then they think, oh crap, let's do something about this.
Yeah, it's starting to affect me now.
Yes, and it's not necessarily that when things start to affect people, they do whatever it is to, put it back to how it was, because I think, that would assume that everybody is terrible. But I get, if things are changing anyway, that's when you sort of go, okay, well, everything's changing anyway, so now I have to decide like which one I'm going towards.
Yeah.
And I suspect that's what, drives a lot of people, and probably, the same with her. It's kind of, she had already been doing her husband's job as MP. It made sense for her to carry on because, she probably had more stuff that she wanted to do.
Yeah, and I do wonder whether doing that job of being her husband's no,
like his standing in for him.
Yeah, like his substitute.
Yeah, his deputy almost.
That's it. Whether that may have changed some of her views, maybe, because I find it extremely hard to. Bearing in mind she was disabled herself, right? So when all the Nazi stuff was kicking off, and the Nazis really didn't like disabled people, did they? Really? They, and I find it very hard to even think that anybody who was that disabled person that the Nazis didn't like could sympathise. Go, they don't like disabled people, but they're not that bad, really.
That was the thing that was sort of surprised me a bit. Was, you said that she went out and she had a tour of Nazi Germany after her accident, and you sort of, I wonder what that experience was like for her. I'm sure that they were all very amiable and friendly towards her, but I can't imagine that it was a particularly supportive, accessible, positive environment.
No.
But then arguably it probably wasn't here either.
No, true. That's true.
Yeah.
And again, we didn't know that they were burning people. So we didn't find that out until after the war. And if she was, and I know it was quite soon after the war, because when we found the camps was, when the war had just ended.
Yeah, when we liberated.
Yeah, but she was only in politics until 1945.
But also, she probably would have been that a good example of kind of the right type of disabled person.
Yes.
She
Not
wasn't born with her
disability.
disability. Yeah. It was acquired due to an unfortunate accident. But she's
not going to pass it on to her kids.
She's not going to pass it on to her kids. She's not taking anything from the public purse because she's from a very well-off family, and she can pay the servers to help her out with things around the house,
rather than expecting everybody else to pay for her. Yeah.
As we know that she's described useless eaters, whereas you couldn't really describe her as that.
No. Okay. So to steal the Evil Genius format, but tweak it so that we don't get sued, would we put her in the bin, or would we put her on the trophy shelf?
Are we calling this very bad people instead of evil genius?
Very bad or very nice?
Naughty or nice? Naughty or nice?
Does she go in the bin, or does she go on the trophy shelf?
You go first.
I think I put her in the bin because I can't get past the self-preservation element of it.
Daisy?
Yeah, see, I'm not very good at making moral judgments about historical people because I just find them interesting. So it's like, I mean, as a person, I would put her in the bin, but like as just sort of a history, like sort of in my head is sort of between like interesting or not interesting rather than are they a good person or a bad person.
I think she's definitely interesting. I mean, we wouldn't have been talking about her for an hour and a half if she wasn't interesting. I know we can talk crap, but I don't think we can stretch it out quite this long. But yeah, I don't think.
I do find it very hard to believe that there wasn't even a little bit of an element where she went, oh, the Nazis were really bad. Oh, okay. How can I make myself look not like? How can I disassociate myself? I know. I'll campaign for all these good causes. I find it very hard to believe that would not have run through her mind, because I know it would. I know it would have done. Like it would have done with me probably.
I also just fundamentally believe that anybody who doesn't believe in universal healthcare should be put up against a wall and shot. But that might be I might be coming across a bit Stalinist there.
That is an extremely strong way of wording that opinion, but yes, I happen to agree. Maybe not in those words. I think I'd put her in the bin, because I don't think you can change your initial. If you fight and are mouthing off to such an extent about fascism and Nazism and
that your descendants have to get rid of your writings to cover it up. Then,
exactly. That's pretty bad, isn't it? Yeah. It's not like this day and age where you can just go delete tweet. Like,
but even then, like there's nothing's ever really gone from the internet.
Oh, no.
I definitely there are MySpace posts and pictures of me in my bra from when I was 17 that are going to come back to haunt me. I am just waiting for it.
If this podcast gets big and we get cancelled because of Alice in a bra, I
won't get cancelled. I'll just have to do a lot of apologising.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, but
Lady Aspley, Astley or
Astley.
Lady Aspley, you go in the bin. Lady Astley, you can carry on doing whatever it is you're doing.
Is that like
never giving you up?
Yeah, posh granny.
That was fascinating.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you very much, Daisy.
Thank you, Daisy.
Before we go, everybody, a little reminder that if you enjoyed this week's episode, please rate, review and subscribe on your podcast player platform place, because reviews and ratings and subscriptions really, really help new listeners find us. And the more new listeners we have, the more content we can do. Lucy, did you want to plug the mailing list, etc.?
Yep, we've got a mailing list that if you subscribe to, you get told when you have a new episode coming up or is out. We also are going to do a lot more bonus content in the future, but to make that worthwhile, we need to have an audience to show it to. So if you'd like to subscribe, you can find it on our website, I believe. Just click sign up to our newsletter, give us your name and your email address, and we will do the rest.
Cool, everybody. We will see you next time. Thanks very much for listening.
Thanks, Daisy.
All right, I promise next time I won't bring a Nazi.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the lABLEd podcast. If you like the show, please rate, review and subscribe. You can follow us on social media at lABLEd podcast.
Thanks go to our editor Adam Hall, our music composer Maisie Crunden, and our graphic designer Sarah Coley.
We'll see you next time.